I remember the first night clearly. The fog had rolled in like a living thing, curling around the trunks of the ancient pines that crowded the small clearing. A pale, trembling light flickered from the dying campfire, casting long shadows that seemed to move with a will of their own. The air was thick and still, so silent I could hear the soft rasp of my own breath. Somewhere deep in the forest, a branch cracked sharply, startling me, but no one else was there. I felt the pull of something watching from the darkness, just beyond the edge of the firelight. Something patient, waiting. My fingers brushed against the damp earth, grounding me, but it did nothing to ease the creeping unease that knotted my stomach. I tried to convince myself it was just a wind or an animal, but the shapes shifting between the trees felt deliberate. That's when I saw it. The trail was quiet. Leaves pressed under my boots in soft, muffled thuds. The morning air was cold, damp with the smell of pine and earth. Mist lingered between the trunks, clinging to the moss. It smelled faintly of decay, of something forgotten. I followed the narrow path, feeling the forest hush settle around me. I noticed it then, a murmur, low and fleeting. It seemed to rise from the trees themselves. At first, I thought it was the wind, but the cadence was wrong, deliberate, slow, thoughtful. I stopped. The whispering stilled, and then I heard my own thoughts echoed back, softly, every doubt, every fleeting curiosity, repeated in a voice not my own. I walked on. The trees leaned closer, or maybe I was leaning in. Shadows pooled beneath gnarled roots. A pale light filtered through the fog, making the air shimmer almost alive. The whispers followed. They didn't speak words. They shaped themselves into questions. Questions I had never spoken aloud. Questions I didn't want answers to. I reached a grove where the trees arched over like cathedral walls. The fog thickened, curling around my ankles. Every breath felt heavy, damp, almost thick enough to touch. The air smelled faintly metallic. A branch shifted above me. I flinched, expecting anything, but nothing moved. Only the whispers, soft, persistent, mimicking me, learning me. I stepped forward. The ground was springy, littered with pine needles and wet leaves. Each footstep made a quiet echo. It seemed louder here in the grove, or maybe the whispers had grown softer, and my own thoughts were too loud to hear. I paused again, closed my eyes. The forest felt wrong. Not angry, not sad, just waiting, and I could feel it in the quiet, pressing against the back of my neck. A faint rustle to my left. I turned. The trees stood as they had before. Yet I could swear one shifted slightly, its shadow stretching toward me. A shiver ran down my spine, cold and wet. The whispers hummed, almost excited. I walked deeper into grove. The whispers shaped themselves into fragments of memory. A thought I had at breakfast. A conversation I had forgotten. Every passing idea echoed back, slower, distorted, almost questioning me. A wind rose suddenly, brushing through branches. It smelled like frost and soil. The fog thickened into a curtain. The grove seemed smaller now, tighter. I could feel the air pulse, as if inhaling with me. My foot caught on something soft. A leaf? A root? I knelt, brushing aside. Nothing there. Yet I felt a presence just beyond the fog, watching, not in a way that made me panic, but in a way that made me want to remember every step. I pressed on. The whispers grew intimate. They knew my fears. They mirrored my longing. It felt like the grove itself was breathing alongside me. Sinking, I reached a small clearing. The fog thinned, revealing pale light spilling across damp moss. Silence stretched here. The whispering had paused, leaving only a soft, expectant hum in the trees. I stopped, breathed in the cold, metallic air. The ground was silent beneath my boots. For a moment, I thought I could step outside time itself. Outside thought. And then I realized I was still alone. Yet the forest knew me. The whispers had followed me, lingered, waiting, watching. Soft footsteps in rhythm with mine. I turned to leave. The grove seemed to sigh behind me. Shadows curled as if reluctant to let me go. I felt a cold touch at the back of my neck. Fleeting, almost imagined. I walked away. The whispers faded slowly. But even now I can feel them, curling at the edges of thought, soft, patient, whispering secrets I may never speak. The trail opened again. Sunlight broke the fog in pale streaks. I breathed in. The air felt ordinary once more. But I knew, deep in the quiet corners of my mind, that the grove was still there, waiting, whispering. The fog lay thick over the path. It smelled of damp earth and cold stone. Every step felt heavier, as if the mist clung to my boots. I saw it then, a faint flicker of light, a lantern, pale and wavering, hovering somewhere beyond the fog. I blinked, and it was closer, closer, though no one moved, though the air was empty. Shadows stretched from the trees, not quite natural. They curled, reaching, bending toward the lantern's glow. I felt the hush of the forest press against my chest. Each blink brought the light nearer. I tried to fix my eyes, but it danced just beyond clarity. Saw footsteps, or maybe only the rhythm of my own, echoed in the stillness. I slowed, breath thick in my chest. The fog wrapped around me, damp on my skin, clinging to my hair. It smelled faintly of smoke and cold ash. The lantern flickered again, and for a moment I thought I saw a figure. But when I stared, it dissolved into mist. Only the light remained, hovering, advancing. The trees whispered in rustling sighs. A branch brushed my shoulder, cool and brittle. The fog trembled, moving with a life of its own. The lantern's glow stretched, bending shadows into shapes I could not name. I stepped backward. Each footfall left a shallow imprint, quickly swallowed by mist. The lantern moved, not along the ground, not from anywhere I could follow. It simply was closer. I reached out, air thick, damp, but the lantern remained out of reach. I heard a hum, low, constant, almost inside my skull. I blinked again, and it had shifted, closer, hovering at the edge of the fog, just beyond the sway of the trees. My heartbeat drummed against my ribs, slow, deliberate. Shadows coiled around the light. I could see them stretch and twist, brush against the fog, vanish. Cold seeped into my hands, my neck, the hollow of my back. The fog tasted of iron, of something I could not name. I stopped moving. Stillness settled, thick and wet. The lantern flickered once, twice, and I could feel it watching me. I blinked. It had moved again. No footsteps, no sound, yet was closer, closer to the edge of my reach. The hum in the air grew softer, then quieter. The shadows grew longer, reaching from places they should not have been. The fog curled at my ankles, climbing like cold fingers. I held my breath. The lantern paused, suspended in the gray air, its light flickering weakly, almost uncertain. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. The glow pulled me in, soft, magnetic. I felt the fog press against my skin, inhale with me. I stepped forward. It shifted again. Closer still, just beyond the haze. Shadows bent, lingered, then retreated as if frightened by their own shape. I could smell the lantern now. Not smoke, not oil. Something older, earthy, wet stone and rotting leaves, with a faint metallic edge. I blinked. It flickered once more, and I saw a hand, pale, half-formed, vanish into the mist. The fog thinned slightly. The lantern remained, hovering, waiting, soft vibrating through the space around me. I backed away slowly, footsteps silent, careful. The lantern flickered again, not moving, but not gone. It seemed to breathe, almost in rhythm with me. Shadows stretched toward it, then withdrew. The fog wrapped around the trees like gauze. Each movement felt amplified, every sound muted but closer. I kept my eyes on the light. Slowly, carefully, I left the clearing. The fog thickened behind me, swallowing every trace of the lantern. But I knew it would remain there, waiting, flickering, always closer. Each time I blinked, the path opened again. The air smelled clean, ordinary, yet in the hollow of my chest, the hum lingered, a reminder of light, of shadow, of fog that watches and waits. The air was crisp with autumn. Leaves lay thick, brown and brittle beneath my boots. Each step crunched softly, swallowed by the fog that drifted low between the trees. I felt it before I heard it, a faint disturbance behind me. Soft, deliberate footsteps. I stopped. The forest remained still. Mist curled around the trunks like smoke. Yet the footsteps continued, slow, measured, unseen. I turned slowly. Nothing, only the fog, drifting and pale. The branches swayed lightly, brushing the cold against my arms. I crouched, pulled aside the top layer of leaves. The damp smell of earth rose, metallic, rich, alive. And beneath the brown blanket, something moved. It wasn't quite human, not in shape, not in motion. It shifted under the leaves, small and lithe, yet uneven, unnatural. Its skin, or what I could see of it, gleamed faintly in the pale light. A soft rustling surrounded me. The fog hummed through the trees. Each leaf that moved against my hand felt aware, alive. I froze. Its eyes, if they could be called that, reflected nothing, yet they were curious. Watching, waiting. The footsteps behind me continued. Closer. Or maybe it was my pulse, echoing too loudly in the quiet. I dared not turn, dared not blink. I touched the ground gently. Cool earth pressed against my fingertips. A faint vibration hummed beneath the leaves. It moved again, closer, almost greeting me. The fog thickened, curling around my shoulders. The forest smelled of moss and wet bark, tinged with a faint, unsettling odor of decay. Breath caught in my throat. The being shifted, smaller limbs brushing against leaves, whispering over dirt and roots. I crouched lower. The light was pale, diffused to the fog, painting everything in shades of gray and brown. The movement under the leaves slowed, then paused. Time seemed to hold its breath with me. I could hear my own heartbeat. Slower now. Careful. The rustling beneath me stretched, elongated into shapes I could not name. A branch snapped nearby. I flinched. The figure beneath the leaves froze. Then, a faint exhalation, like the wind through hollow trees, escaped it. Or perhaps the forest itself. I reached out. Touching the leaves felt strange, almost sentient. Something shifted beneath, warm, moist, alive, but wrong. Its shape trembled in the mist, moving in patterns my mind could not follow. The footsteps behind me stopped abruptly. Silence pressed in. Only the faint, rhythmic hum of fog and breathing lingered. I could smell damp pine, faintly charred, and the metallic hint that clung to the being below. I crouched still, holding the leaves apart. It observed me. A pause so complete, I felt the world narrow to this single space. I wondered if it understood me, or if it merely watched, patient, curious, indifferent. I let the leaves fall back into place slowly. The rustling stilled, yet I could feel it beneath, waiting, alive, not quite human, and perhaps not fully alone. The fog curled around my boots as I rose. The forest exhaled. The footsteps I thought I had heard vanished. Yet in the quiet, I knew the presence lingered. I walked on. The mist closed behind me, erasing traces. Leaves crunched softly underfoot. The being remained beneath its brown blanket, unseen but aware, moving in rhythms that matched the pulse of the forest. And somewhere deep in the hush of the trees, I felt it curious, patient, watching. The forest thinned as I walked. Branches scraped against my coat. Fog drifted low, curling around my boots and ankles. I came upon a cabin. Abandoned, weathered, its wood gray and cracked. The air smelled of wet pine and old rot. A faint hum lingered in the silence, like breath held too long. The door sagged on its hinges. I didn't push it open. Something drew me to the window instead. A single pane stared back at me. Dark, empty, yet it felt alive. Like the cabin itself was exhaling, waiting. I stepped closer. The ground smelled of earth and decayed leaves. The fog pressed against the walls, curling in to hide the floorboards. The void inside the window shifted. I blinked, and I could swear it blinked too. My heart slowed, then thumped against my ribs, deliberate, heavy. Something watched, something just beyond recognition. The pain was cold under my fingertips. I pressed closer. The air smelled faintly metallic, like iron on skin. The dark inside pulsed slightly, as if alive. I drew back. The shadows within stretched unnaturally. I could feel them moving, leaning toward me, patient, slow. I tried to name it. A face? An eye? It was both. And neither. A hollow stare that could not be recognized, but felt familiar in the deepest part of me. The wind sighed through the trees, rustling, soft, carrying the scent of wet moss and distant smoke. The cabin seemed to breathe with me. Or maybe I breathed with it. I stepped closer again. The glass was colder now, the void darker. It felt as if it exhaled slowly, drawing my heartbeat. I could hear my pulse in the fog. Saw footsteps, echoing though I was alone. The hum rose faintly, vibrating along the walls of the cabin. Shadows swirled, brushing against the edges of my vision. I peered deeper, and it stared. Not at me, not through me, but through the window, through everything. The cold seeped into my chest. A heaviness pressed my shoulders down. I wanted to turn away, but my eyes were anchored, held by the hollow gaze. The forest outside continued in soft rustles. A branch shifted. Leaves crunched under invisible steps. Yet nothing appeared. I pressed my hand against the glass again. Frost clung to my fingers. The dark inside pulsed slightly, rhythmic, patient. The hum lingered, subtle, low. I tried to breathe quietly. The void seemed to inhale with me. Time stretched, slow and deliberate. Every heartbeat echoed inside the hollow eye. I stepped back. The fog drifted closer, curling around the cabin. Shadows bent toward the light, then recoiled. The dark remained, watching. I turned slightly, almost running, but my steps were careful. The air smelled of damp wood, moss, and something sharp, metallic. I could feel it pressing at the edges of my thoughts. The cabin loomed behind me, silent, patient. The window's darkness pulsed once more, and I realized it was not the cabin that was abandoned. It was the eye, waiting, breathing, patient. I walked away. The fog swallowed my footsteps. The forest exhaled, and the hollow gaze lingered in my mind, echoing long after I could no longer see it. The creek lay quiet beneath the moon. Its surface shimmered, silver and liquid, reflecting more than the sky. Shadows moved there, slow and deliberate, swimming just beneath the pale light. Mist rose from the water. It curled along the banks, thick and soft, carrying the scent of wet stone and moss. The air was damp, clinging to my coat and hair. A hum emerged, low, steady, vibrating through the fog. It was faint at first, almost mistaken for wind, but it grew patient, insistent. I stepped closer, boots pressed into soft earth, leaves brushing my ankles. The hum pulled at me, subtle, magnetic. I felt drawn, compelled, even though I could not see its source. The creek's reflection shimmered oddly. Shadows danced in impossible shapes, bending and twisting across the water. It was beautiful and wrong. I paused. The hum thickened, vibrating through the soles of my boots, through my chest. The fog shifted, brushing my skin with cold fingers. Every breath smelled faintly of earth and decay, mixed with something sweet I could not name. I moved forward. The water rippled without wind. Shadows twisted across the surface like smoke. My pulse synchronized with the soft, steady hum. Something solid rose before me, or I stumbled into it. Cold, unmoving. Its edges were indistinct, yet undeniable. I pressed my hands against it. The surface was slick, smooth, yet organic. A faint warmth radiated, almost breathing beneath my touch. The mist curled around it, clutching at the shape as if hiding it from the world. The shadows on the creek deepened. They moved, slow and liquid, stretching toward the bank. I could feel the hum vibrating in my skull now, low, insistent, like an invisible tide. I breathed carefully. Each inhalation tasted of wet stone and mist, metallic and sharp. The solid shape pressed against my palms, unmoving, yet alive in some unreadable way. I stepped back slightly. The fog swirled, thick and silent. The hum lingered, wrapping around me like smoke. I could see the shadows dancing on the creek again, teasing, following, retreating. I wanted to move away, yet something rooted me in place. The creek reflected my hesitation, bending my own shadow across the water, mingling with those that should not exist. I reached forward, tracing the shape lightly with my fingertips. It was cold again, unyielding, yet beneath that cold, I felt a pulse, a rhythm synchronous with my own. Slow, patient, unrelenting. The mist thickened, wrapping around my ankles, curling over my boots. The hum shifted, almost questioning, almost coaxing. The shadows on the water seemed to swirl in response, stretching, pulling, fading. I stepped back again. The figure remained, solid, unmoving, yet somehow present, aware. The creek flowed beside it, indifferent, carrying the shadows downstream. I could feel the fog pressing against my chest, the cool weight of it heavy, intimate. My breath mingled with the mist, damp and sharp. The hum lingered in my ears, soft, steady, insistent. I turned slowly. The creek reflected the moon, but its light seemed warped, twisting around the shape. Shadows bent toward it, retreated, vanished. I moved away, careful, each step muffled by wet earth and leaves. The hum faded, lingering only as a memory in my chest. The creek continued to shimmer, silver and strange. Shadows swimming beneath, patient, quiet, watching. I walked into the deeper fog. The figure remained behind me, solid, unmoving, and yet somehow alive, waiting, breathing, silent. The forest exhaled around me. Mist lingered at the edge of the creek, carrying the faint hum like a whisper. I could feel its pulse in the quiet of the night, drawing me back, even as I kept walking. The forest was quiet. Mist drifted low between the trunks, clinging to the moss and fallen leaves. The air smelled of wet earth and pine, thick and cool against my skin. I heard it first, a soft footstep, distant, careful. I paused. The forest held its breath with me. The hum of fog, the rustle of unseen leaves, settled into silence. Another footstep, and another. They echoed softly, each one deliberate and measured. Yet when I looked around, the forest was empty. I stepped forward, boots pressed into wet leaves, soft, deliberate. The footsteps continued ahead, pulling me deeper into fog. I followed, drawn by the sound, each echo matching my heartbeat. The trees leaned close. Shadows pulled beneath twisted roots. Mist curled around my ankles, damp and heavy. The footsteps lingered, always ahead, always just out of reach. I stopped again, listened. The forest hummed faintly, wind brushing branches, rustling leaves. Yet the echoes remained, taunting, patient. I moved slowly, careful. The fog thickened, damp against my skin, smelling faintly of decay and wet moss. The footsteps continued, steady, rhythmic, yet there was no one there. A branch shifted. I flinched. The echoes matched it, reverberating through the mist. I tried to name the source, but the forest offered none. I pressed forward. The fog wrapped around me like cold fingers. Every breath I drew felt heavy, damp, metallic. The footsteps echoed again, closer now. Or maybe just my imagination. I stopped, listened, soft, slow, mocking. The forest seemed to pulse with the echoes. Each step I took repeated in the mist, stretching, lingering, bending reality. I could feel the pressure behind my eyes, the tension coiling in my chest. I turned, empty, mist drifting between the trees, thick and gray. Branches swayed, but no wind stirred. Leaves rustled softly, brushing my coat, yet the echoes remained. I moved again, careful, slow. The footsteps ahead mimicked my own pace now, or perhaps my own echoed back to me. I could not tell. The fog thickened further. Every shadow seemed to lean toward me. The forest hummed faintly, vibrating in rhythm with my pulse. The footsteps lingered around me, everywhere, nowhere. I crouched briefly, pressing a hand to the wet ground. Earth cold, damp, alive beneath my fingers. The echoes paused for a heartbeat, and then returned, soft, deliberate, patient. I tried to move quietly. The footsteps followed, stretching, bending in impossible patterns. I felt the fog wrap around my chest, cling to my coat, and whisper across my neck. Each step forward was mirrored in the mist, in the shadows, in the silence. I stopped. The forest exhaled with me. The echoes hung there, suspended, patient, mocking. No direction, no source, only presence. I walked slowly, careful, deliberate. The fog pressed around me. Shadows swirled. The footsteps echoed, stretching behind, ahead, beside me, never ceasing. I left the deeper mist. The forest opened slightly, light breaking through the fog in pale shafts. The echoes faded slowly, lingering faintly in the edges of hearing, a whisper in rhythm with my own heartbeat. Yet even as the path cleared, I knew they remained. Footsteps without feet, echoes without source. Patient, waiting. The forest was quiet, yet alive. Mist lingered low, brushing my boots and curling around the trunks. The air smelled of damp moss and pine, cool and heavy. I noticed it then. A faint light, pale, almost timid, glowing between the trees. It pulsed slowly like a heartbeat, soft and steady. I stepped closer. Leaves crunched beneath my boots, muffled by the fog. The light shifted slightly, responding to my movement, or so it seemed. The forest held its breath. Even the wind stilled. The rustle of branches faded to nothing. The mist pressed closer to my skin, cool and damp. It smelled faintly of earth and smoke, and something else I could not name. I reached toward the glow. It pulsed again, a heartbeat in rhythm with mine, drawing me forward. Shadows stretched between the trees, bending toward the light, then recoiling. I stepped carefully. The ground was soft, damp underfoot, leaves pressing against my ankles. Each step brought the light nearer, yet it remained distant, teasing alive. The fog swirled, curling around tree trunks like cold fingers. The light shimmered through it, fragile and inviting. I could hear a hum beneath the hush of the forest. Not loud, just a vibration, low, steady, resonating with the pulse of the glow. I leaned closer, breath shallow. The forest felt suspended, waiting with me. Every twig and leaf seemed attentive, every shadow still. I reached again. The light brightened subtly, pulsing warm against the cool gray of mist. It felt alive, not just a glow, but something aware. I stepped forward. The fog wrapped around my boots, around my coat. It smelled of wet pine, of cold earth, and faintly metallic, like iron on skin. The light pulsed rhythmic, patient, insistent. A branch shifted above me. I froze. The light remained steady, pulsing, unmoved by the rustle. Yet the forest seemed to lean in closer, pressing against my senses. I reached once more. The glow throbbed against the gray mist, like a living heartbeat in the hollow of the forest. Shadows in the trees curled toward it, bending around one another in quiet choreography. I crouched slightly, tracing my hand through the mist. It was cold, damp, alive with subtle movement. The glow pulsed in response, or perhaps it always pulsed, marking its own rhythm. I stepped forward again. My footsteps were soft, careful. Leaves crunched underfoot, yet the light remained, always distant, always inviting. The fog seemed to part around it, giving space, holding its breath. The hum deepened faintly, vibrating through the mist. It felt like the pulse of something patient, watching, waiting. I held my hand out, fingers trembling slightly. The forest exhaled around me. The glow pulsed once more. Soft, steady, mesmerizing. It painted the fog in pale silver, brushing my skin, wrapping around my thoughts. I felt drawn forward, pulled gently by its quiet insistence. I stepped closer, then stopped. The forest remained still. Shadows leaned, twisted, paused, and recoiled. The mist curled around my boots. Damp, cold, alive. The glow pulsed gently, rhythm steady, patient, aware. I breathed slowly. The light remained, steady, pulsing like a heartbeat I could almost match. The hum lingered, vibrating faintly through the air, through my chest, into my bones. Everything else was quiet, distant, irrelevant. I reached again. The glow brightened slightly, then dimmed. Shadows danced softly in its light. The forest held its breath. I held mine. I stepped back slowly. The glow remained, patient, waiting, pulsing softly behind the trees. The mist curled around the trunks, shadows stretching, folding into themselves. I could still feel the pulse in my chest, gentle, insistent. I walked away, careful, slow. The forest exhaled behind me. The light lingered, pale and pulsing, a heartbeat in the mist, watching, patient, alive. The forest was thick, fog curling around the trunks like slow fingers. Leaves pressed under my boots, damp and brittle. The air smelled of cold pine, wet earth, and faint smoke. I felt it first. A weight above me. A presence, quiet but deliberate. I stopped. The mist pressed against my skin, cool and damp. Branches whispered softly, swaying without wind. And then I saw it. Something stared from above. Pale, still, its shape half hidden in the fog and shadow. Movement slow, deliberate. Human, almost, but wrong. I froze. Breath caught in my chest. The forest seemed to hold its breath with me. Mist curled around my ankles, damp and heavy. The hum of distant leaves filled the silence. It shifted. A subtle motion, deliberate, watching. Not a leap, not a fall. Just observing. The angle of its head, the tilt of its shoulders, unnervingly human, yet wrong. I could feel my pulse in my throat. Footsteps? None. Only the soft sigh of fog moving through the branches. The air smelled faintly metallic. Cold. Sharp. I stepped forward. The figure mirrored me, just a fraction, subtle, patient. I blinked. It did too, almost in rhythm. The branches groaned above. Shadows stretched unnaturally, bending toward the figure. I could see limbs, pale and thin, curling around bark. Hands? Fingers? Motionless yet alive. I pressed my palms to my chest. The fog wrapped around me, moist and thick. Every breath carried the scent of moss, cold earth, and something else, rotting, subtle, faintly sweet. I wanted to turn. I wanted to run. But my eyes were fixed. It moved again, slowly, deliberately, shifting from one branch to another, almost imperceptibly. Its gaze followed me. I blinked. The mist shifted, hiding it for a moment. Then it reappeared, pale against the dark trunks. The space between us seemed charged, stretching the seconds into eternity. I took another step. The forest hummed softly, leaves brushing one another in invisible currents. The figure leaned slightly forward. A hand curled around a branch, almost human. The movement was deliberate, controlled, unnervingly patient. I felt the chill creep along my spine. The air thickened, damp and cold against my skin. Branches bent as if leaning toward the figure. Shadows pooled beneath it, stretching toward the forest floor, then retreating. I froze again. Soft footsteps echoed behind me. Or maybe only my own heartbeat. The figure tilted its head, watching, patient, unyielding. I exhaled slowly. The fog swirled, brushing against my boots, the hem of my coat. Every breath I drew seemed louder than it should be, vibrating through the silence. The watcher did not move its eyes. If eyes they were, just stared. I took a careful step backward. The figure mirrored me, subtly, deliberately. Branches creaked faintly, leaves brushing like whispers. The air smelled of wet pine, cold soil, and something faintly metallic, almost iron. I turned slightly. The forest seemed endless, fog pressing in all directions. The figure remained above, motionless yet aware. The branches held it up, but it did not sway with the wind. It simply existed. I exhaled again. Footsteps, soft, careful, carried me a few paces. The figure did not follow, not in the way the forest should allow. It stayed suspended, patient, observing. I dared to blink. It blinked too, slowly, deliberately. The forest held its breath. The fog wrapped closer. Shadows curled around trunks, stretching toward the watcher, then recoiling. I walked on slowly, careful, measured. Each step seemed echoed in the silence, in the stillness, in the fog. The figure remained above, watching, waiting. The forest exhaled around me. Mist lingered thickly, shadows folding over themselves. And I knew, deep in the quiet of the trees, the watcher remained patient, deliberate, and wrong. The clearing lay quiet beneath the pale light of the moon. Mist drifted low, curling over the grass and fallen leaves. The air smelled of wet earth and cold pine, thick and heavy against my skin. I heard it then, a soft cry, faint, distant, trembling through the fog. I paused. The forest seemed to still with me. Leaves hung motionless on the branches, the hum of the night fading into silence. The cry came again, a high, hollow sound that trembled in the chest. It felt almost human, yet wrong, distant, echoing across the clearing like it belonged to someone or something else. I stepped forward, boots pressed into damp moss and soft soil. The fog curled around my ankles, cold and insistent. Each breath I drew carried the scent of wet pine and faint decay. I followed the sound, slowly, carefully. It led me across the clearing, past twisted roots and low-lying mist. The cry trembled in the air, fading, rising, a heartbeat I could not match. I stopped. The sound paused, then resumed, closer now, sharper, hollow. I scanned the clearing. Shadows stretched, twisting around the trunks. Mist curled like fingers, brushing my coat. I traced the source, and found nothing. No figure, no movement, only the echo of the cry lingering. Then I saw them, footprints in the soft earth. Not human, not any animal I could name. They led across the clearing, fading into the fog, deliberate, patient. I knelt, touching the cold ground. The prints pressed into the soil, deep, unnatural. A faint vibration hummed through the earth beneath my fingers. The cry trembled again, echoing softly, almost shyly. I followed the footprints slowly. Mist pressed against my skin, damp and clinging. The clearing seemed to lean in, holding its breath. Shadows swirled at the edges of vision, bending toward the path of the prints, then retreating. The cry sounded again, nearer, yet still elusive. Hollow, empty. It carried a weight I could not name. Regret, loss, a quiet sorrow suspended in the night. I paused at the edge of the fog. The footprints vanished into the gray, leaving only the hollow echo behind. I pressed a hand to my chest. Heartbeat slow, deliberate. The mist curled tighter around me, heavy with the scent of wet pine and faint iron. Leaves rustled softly, brushing my coat. The clearing seemed alive with absence, the cry lingering in the air, tethered to nothing. I stepped back slowly. Every movement echoed softly across the clearing. Shadows bent and swirled, as if acknowledging the presence of something unseen. The cry trembled again, faint, distant, fading. I exhaled carefully. The forest exhaled with me, releasing the tension, yet not the sense of absence. The footprints were gone. The hollow cry lingered in memory, suspended in the mist, patient, quiet. I walked slowly, careful, tracing my steps back. The clearing faded behind me into fog and shadow. Leaves pressed underfoot, soft and damp. Every breath tasted of cold pine, wet earth, and the faint metallic hint that clung to the hollow cry. I could still feel it. The absence, the echo, the weight of something that had passed through, leaving its mark in the earth, in the mist, in the hollow of the clearing. The fog curled around the trunks, shadows leaning in, observing. The cry faded completely, leaving only silence. And yet, I knew it remained, patient, unseen, waiting in the spaces between the trees. I walked on. The clearing disappeared behind me. Mist swirled, shadows stretched, and the earth pressed cold and damp beneath my boots. And somewhere in the quiet, I could still feel the hollow cry echoing, patient, lingering, insistent. The moon hung high above the forest. Its pale light washed over the ground, silvering leaves and damp earth. Mist curled along the trunks, cool and heavy against my skin. I noticed them first. Shadows stretching across the forest floor. Long, thin, bending toward me as if drawn by some unseen weight. I took a step. They moved, not behind me, not beneath me, beside me, independent. Leaves rustled softly under my boots. Mist wrapped around my ankles, cold, damp, clinging. The shadows swirled slightly, stretching longer, leaning closer. I slowed my pace. Each movement I made was mirrored, but never perfectly. They bent, twisted, hesitated, then followed, like a memory trying to remember itself. Separate yet tethered, the forest seemed alive with them. Branches swayed faintly, leaves brushing together in soft murmurs. The air smelled of wet earth, moss, and the faint tang of iron. Each breath carried the chill of the night deeper into my lungs. I paused. The shadows lingered, curling and stretching, patient, deliberate. Even the mist seemed to lean toward them, shifting subtly, wrapping around their forms. They were not mine, and yet they were. I stepped forward again. The shadows stretched in response, independent, deliberate. I could feel the weight of them pressing against the edges of my vision, tugging at the corners of perception, pulling at the stillness of the forest. The hum of the night shifted slightly, subtle vibrations along the trunks. Through the mist, beneath my boots, the shadows bent closer. They twisted toward the gaps between trees, stretching longer than logic should allow, yet never breaking the rhythm of my steps. I breathed slowly. The fog pressed against my coat, damp and cold. Leaves clung to my boots, rustling softly with each movement. The shadows leaned toward me, then recoiled, deliberate, patient. I tried to stop, to stand still. Even then they stretched, curling toward me as if drawn by something beyond sight, not exactly following, not exactly waiting. They existed in the space I could not fill, in the corners of perception where certainty fades. I moved again, careful, slow. Each step echoed softly against the damp ground. Shadows twisted with the fog, blending, separating, bending in impossible ways. I pressed a hand to the trunk of a tree. Its bark was cold, rough under my fingers. The mist wrapped around my wrist, damp, curling. The shadows shifted again, stretching toward me in delicate, unnatural arcs. I exhaled slowly. The forest exhaled with me, yet the shadows did not release. They lengthened, independent, patient. I could feel them brushing the edges of my awareness, mimicking, observing, waiting. I stepped carefully along the forest path. Boots pressed softly into the damp earth, moss, and fallen leaves. The fog curled higher, drifting past my knees, wrapping around the trunks. The shadows mirrored, extended, lingered, almost sentient. I slowed again, listened to my breath mingle with the subtle hum of the forest. The mist shifted faintly, brushing my ankles. The shadows leaned closer still, bending impossibly, independent yet tethered. I dared to glance behind me. The forest appeared empty. Only the fog remained, curling around trunks and roots. Yet the shadows were there, stretching, bending, deliberate. I exhaled, careful, soft, moved forward again. Each step was mirrored and twisted, stretching beyond logic, lingering beyond reason. The forest seemed to pulse with their presence. I walked slowly. The moonlight silvered the mist, casting the shadows long across the ground. They followed, yes, but not as one follows. They existed alongside, stretching, bending, patient, independent, relentless. I stepped out of the deeper fog. The shadows remained at the edge, long, curling, patient. They did not retreat entirely. And I knew, somewhere in the quiet, they would wait, stretching, bending, forever following, yet never truly caught. The forest opened slowly before me. Mist curled along the ground, brushing my boots, damp and cold. The air smelled of wet pine and soil, thick and heavy. I noticed it first. A path, old, broken, overgrown. It appeared suddenly, cutting through the trees like a forgotten memory. The trail was uneven, roots curling through soft earth. Leaves clung to the gaps in the soil, wet and brown, pressing underfoot. The fog pressed closer, curling along the edges of the path, damp and insistent. I stepped forward, softly, careful. The forest seemed to exhale with each movement, branches swaying, shadows stretching. The path wound irregularly, broken in places, swallowed by weeds and fallen logs. Each step felt necessary, as if the forest itself whispered that I must follow. Yet a cold weight pressed at my chest, a quiet caution I could not ignore. The mist clung to my coat, wet and clinging. The hum of distant leaves brushed faintly against my ears. Roots caught my boots. Branches scratched softly at my face, gentle yet deliberate. I leaned closer to the path. It narrowed, curling around mossy boulders and the trunks of ancient trees. Shadows pulled at the edges, bending toward the trail. The fog thickened slightly, damp against my skin, smelling faintly of earth and decay. I stepped carefully. Soft, deliberate. The forest seemed aware of each movement, pressing closer in stillness, holding its breath. The trail twisted. Roots tangled like fingers across the soil. Branches hung low, brushing my hair, the damp scent of moss strong. The path felt alive, guiding me, yet warning me. I paused. The silence of the forest deepened. Only the faint rustle of leaves, the distant hum of fog, and my own careful breath. The path seemed to curl in on itself, folding, hiding something in the twists I could not see. I moved again. The trail dipped slightly, soft earth giving underfoot. Each step echoed faintly, bouncing in the stillness. Shadows twisted along the edges, stretching beyond the reach of my sight. A broken log crossed the path. I crouched, brushing moss from the surface. The wood was damp, cool under my fingers, rotting slightly. The trail continued beyond it, disappearing into thicker fog. I hesitated. The forest pressed in, watching. Mist curled higher, brushing my boots and coat. The path beckoned, silent, patient, deliberate. I felt the weight of it, a quiet danger hidden in the twists. I stepped over the log. The trail wound around another bend, roots curling across the ground like fingers. Shadows stretched along the sides, bending toward me. The fog moved with me, swirling, clinging, pressing cold against my skin. Each step was careful, deliberate. The forest seemed alive with expectation. Branches bent slightly, leaves whispering, the hum of the mist vibrating faintly through the air. The path remained broken, overgrown, yet insistently pulling me forward. I paused again, breath slow. The path curled away into fog, edges uncertain, twisted. I could sense the danger hiding in its turns, yet something inside urged me to continue. I stepped forward, boots pressing into damp leaves and moss. Branches brushed my shoulders, the air smelling faintly of wet pine and decaying earth. The trail wound deeper, broken and overgrown, a ribbon through shadows and fog, pulling me quietly into its embrace. I moved slowly, deliberately. The forest seemed to lean in, watching. Mist curled at my ankles, cold and damp. Shadows pooled along the trail. Yet the path remained fractured and overgrown, insistent, patient, calling me forward. And I followed. The forest thinned, mist curling along the trunks like fingers. The air was damp, heavy with the scent of moss and cold earth. Leaves pressed soft under my boots, wet and brittle. I noticed them first. Stones, moss-covered, dark, arranged in a circle, ancient and deliberate. They pressed against the fog, pale and solemn. I stepped closer. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Shadows pooled around the stones, bending toward them, then recoiling. A soft whisper drifted through the mist. I paused. The sound wrapped around me, curling through the fog, brushing my ears. Low, hesitant, like a memory half forgotten. It spoke no words I recognized, yet it felt intentional. The stones were cold to the touch. Moss pressed damp against my fingertips. The circle was perfect, each rock spaced evenly, patient, silent. And the whispers persisted, curling along the fog, gentle but insistent. I wanted to step back, to leave. The urge pressed against my chest, cold, sharp, warning me. But my feet moved forward on their own. The fog wrapped around my ankles, damp and insistent. Leaves rustled faintly beneath my boots. The whispers rose slightly, brushing against my thoughts, curling around my mind. I could feel in the pit of my stomach, a low, vibrating awareness. I circled the stones slowly. The moss smelled of earth and decay, of rain-soaked soil. The air hummed faintly, almost a vibration beneath the mist. Shadows pulled and shifted, bending toward the circle, patient, deliberate. I crouched slightly, brushing my hand across one of the stones. Cold, solid, yet almost alive. The whispering rose, curling closer, intimate, pressing against my ears. I felt a pull, soft, insistent, subtle, drawing me further into the circle. I wanted to resist. The air smelled damp and metallic, tinged with iron, almost bitter. My coat stuck to my skin as the mist pressed closer, but I could not stop moving forward. The stones seemed pulse faintly, subtle and slow. Shadows bent around them, curling toward the center. The whispers deepened, vibrating through the air, through my chest, through my thoughts. I stepped fully into the circle. The ground was soft, moss pressing damp beneath my boots. Every breath carried the scent of wet pine and earth. The fog wrapped higher, brushing my shoulders, curling around my neck. The whispers circled me now, indistinct, persistent, like the forest itself was speaking in secret. I felt both dread and curiosity, a coil of tension in my chest. I reached out, fingertips brushing the next stone. Damp moss pressed against my skin, cold and slightly rough. The circle seemed alive with anticipation. Shadows pressed against the edges of the fog, stretching, receding, patient. And the whispers rose slightly, like a current beneath the stillness. I stepped forward again, following the subtle pull. Each stone seemed to hum faintly beneath my fingers. The mist pressed tighter around my legs, damp and cold. The whispers brushed my ears, curling along the edges of my mind. I wanted to turn, to flee the circle. The forest seemed to lean in, pressing shadows closer, bending the fog. Yet my feet continued, slow, deliberate, almost unwillingly. I moved fully to the center of the circle. The whispers wrapped around me now, close, intimate, patient. Shadows pooled, bending and folding along the mossy stones. The air hummed faintly, vibrating beneath my skin. The fog pressed damp against my coat, brushing my face. I exhaled slowly. The stones were silent. The whispers softened, curling along the fog, fading slightly. Yet I felt their presence in the damp air, in the shadows, in the pulse beneath my boots. I stepped back slowly. The forest exhaled with me. The stones remained patient, moss-covered, ancient. The whispers lingered faintly in the fog, a soft, insistent echo in the quiet. I walked away, careful, slow. Boots pressed damp leaves beneath me. Mist curled around the trunks, shadows bending in subtle arcs. The circle remained behind me, waiting, watching, whispering softly to the night. The forest thinned into a hollow. Mist pressed low along the ground, curling around roots and rocks. The air smelled damp, heavy with earth and decaying leaves. I heard it first, a low hum, barely perceptible, vibrating through the fog. It pressed against my chest, slow, steady, insistent. Each step I took seemed louder than it should be. Boots pressed into damp moss, each movement echoing softly in the hollow. Leaves rustled with sharper edge, air vibrating slightly around me. The fog thickened unnaturally. It wrapped around my ankles, clinging damp and cold. The hum rose subtly, curling along the mist, almost aware of my presence. I paused. The forest seemed to hold its breath with me. Shadows stretched longer, bending into corners I could not see. Every small sound, my exhale, the brush of my coat, felt magnified. I stepped forward. The hollow seemed to respond, pressing in, narrowing, close enough to touch. The hum pulsed faintly beneath my feet, vibrating through the earth, through the mist, through me. Branches brushed my face softly, the cold, damp needles scraping lightly against my skin. The fog pressed higher, curling around my chest, clinging to my coat. The hum rose and fell, a slow heartbeat threading through the stillness. I tried to focus. Every movement felt deliberate. Boots pressed moss and earth, cold and soft. Leaves rustled sharply, sharper than reality allowed. The fog moved with subtle intention, swirling and curling around me. I stopped. The hollow seemed to lean closer, shadows bending in impossible angles. The hum rose slightly, vibrating through my chest, curling along the edges of my mind. I could feel it there in the pit of my stomach, low and insistent. I moved again, careful, deliberate. The fog brushed my ankles, damp and cold. Every step echoed faintly, bouncing softly in the hollow. The hum followed, bending, stretching, almost alive. Branches hung low, brushing my shoulders. The air smelled of wet pine, damp earth, faintly metallic. The fog wrapped tighter, pressing against my coat, curling toward my face. The hum threaded through it all, a low vibration that refused to be ignored. I stopped again, softly, Slowly, my breath fogging in the cool, damp air. The forest seemed to lean in listening. Shadows stretched along the edges of the fog, bending and folding impossibly. The hum pulsed faintly, synchronizing with the beat of my chest, teasing me with subtle dissonance. I stepped forward once more, each footfall pressed into moss and damp leaves, soft yet resonant. The fog shifted, curling around my legs, bending with intent. The hum vibrated through the ground beneath me, threading into my bones. I felt a subtle disorientation. The edges of the hollow seemed to stretch and compress, bending perception. Shadows twisted with the fog, stretching, folding, bending around me. The hum hummed beneath it all, patient, low, insistent. I exhaled slowly. The mist clung to my hair, damp and cold. The hollow seemed alive with subtle movement, yet nothing shifted that I could see. Every sound was amplified. My breath, the rustle of leaves, the soft press of moss beneath my boots. The hum threaded through it all, steady, patient, vibrating with a quiet insistence. I moved carefully, deliberate, tracing the faint curve of the hollow. Fog pressed around me like a living thing, cold and damp. Shadows pooled to the edges, bending in ways impossible, curling faintly toward me. The hum rose slightly, curling through the mist, through the hollow, through me. I paused again. The forest held its breath. The hollow seemed to wait. Mist wrapped damp around my legs, brushing my coat and arms. Shadows leaned subtly, patient. I walked on, each step pressed into moss and leaves, soft and cold. The hum vibrated faintly beneath my boots. Threading through the hollow, the fog curled higher, leaning, wrapping, shifting with the faint pulse. And somewhere deep in the stillness, I knew it would continue, low, insistent, impossible to ignore, humming softly in the hollow long after I passed. The forest thinned into a small clearing. Mist curled low along the ground, brushing soft against damp leaves. The air smelled of wet earth, moss, and a faint tang of iron. A puddle caught the moonlight, silvered. Still, I knelt slightly to peer into it. Something moved, a flicker, eyes, perhaps, shifting with my gaze, reflections glinting like cold fire across the surface. I froze. The puddle was shallow. No creature should be there. Yet the movement persisted, subtle, deliberate, impossible to ignore. Leaves pressed damp under my boots. Mist curled around my ankles. The forest seemed to inhale with me, holding its breath. Every sound, the rustle of a branch, the brush of fog against my coat, felt amplified. I looked around. The clearing was empty. Shadows leaned and twisted between the trees, bending in ways the fog obscured. The eyes flickered again, along the puddle, shifting as though aware of my attention. I stepped back slowly. The earth was soft, moss and leaves clinging to my boots. Mist pressed higher, brushing my arms, damp and insistent. Yet the reflection remained. Waiting, watching, I crouched again, fingertips brushing the wet edge of the puddle. The cold seeped into my skin. The glint moved, shifting with my every micro-movement, teasing perception. I could feel it then, not behind me, not in front. Around me, a presence, silent, patient, unseen, breath shallow, careful. The forest seemed quieter than before. Leaves barely rustled. Fog pressed damp against my cheeks, clinging, curling. Yet the eyes lingered in the puddle. I leaned closer. The water trembled faintly, not from wind. Reflections flickered and shifted, impossible angles, impossible motion. Cold pressed in my fingers, through the mist, through the bones of the forest. I stepped back again. Mist wrapped around my ankles, curling, pressing. Shadows pooled along the edges of the clearing, bending toward the puddle. Every heartbeat sounded loud, echoing, reverberating against unseen walls of fog. The eyes in the water moved again, closer, shifting. They did not belong to any creature I knew. Yet I sensed them, aware, deliberate, waiting for me to see. I turned slowly, scanning the clearing. Nothing moved. Only fog, damp and curling. Only leaves, pressed soft beneath my boots. Only the faint echo of my own breath, amplified in the stillness. The puddle glimmered again, eyes flickering, shifting, impossible to ignore. I wanted to look away, to flee, yet some part of me was drawn, subtle, insistent, trapped by curiosity. I crouched once more, pressed higher, curling along my coat, brushing my hair. The forest seemed to lean in, patient, waiting. Shadows bent in impossible curves. The glint in the water shifted again, almost human, yet not. I moved forward, careful, deliberate. Fingertips hovered over the surface. The cold seeped faintly into my skin. Reflection shifted with the slight press of the wind, with a tilt of my head. Always watching, always aware. I stepped back finally. Boots pressed damp moss and leaves. Mist wrapped around my ankles, swirling, cold. The forest seemed to exhale. The puddle shimmered faintly, eyes glinting, and somewhere deep in the clearing, I could feel the presence lingering, patient, silent but impossible to ignore. I walked away slowly, each step careful, soft, mist curling around my legs, brushing my coat. Shadows pooled at the edges of the clearing, bending faintly toward the puddle. The reflection remained, shifting ever so slightly with my gaze. I did not look back again, yet I knew it waited, glinting quietly in the water, watching, silent, patient. The forest stretched endlessly. Fog curled low along roots and fallen branches. The air smelled damp, earthy, faintly metallic. I glanced back. The trail I had followed disappeared. Not in mist, not in shadow. It was gone. Darkness replaced it. Unbroken, silent. The forest seemed to swallow everything behind me. Leaves pressed soft beneath my boots. But there was no path to trace. I considered turning back. The impulse tugged at my chest, sharp and urgent, yet the forest pressed forward, endless, indifferent. Shadows pooled along the edges, bending subtly in ways my eyes could not follow. Every step I took felt amplified. Boots pressed damp moss, leaves rustling faintly. Mist curled around my legs, cold and damp. Breath echoed softly, a whispered rhythm in the stillness. I stopped. The trail remained gone. Darkness filled the space where it had been. A low hum of the forest pressed against my ears, patient, insistent. I moved forward cautiously. Branches brushed against my shoulders and face, damp and sticky. Shadows bent slightly, stretching toward the spaces I stepped into. The fog pressed higher, curling around my ankles, pressing close. I glanced back again. Darkness alone stared back at me. No trail, no markers. Only trees fading into the mist, stretching into impossible depths. Each breath felt heavier. The forest seemed alive, patient, observing. Rustling leaves and snapping twigs echoed softly, unnaturally. Every small sound lingered, amplified in the stillness. I pressed on. Fog pressed damp against my coat, curling along my sleeves. Shadows pulled along trunks, bending and folding as I passed. The forest stretched endlessly, silent yet alive. I tried to call out. My voice felt swallowed instantly, muted by the thick air. No answer, no echo, only the soft press of fog around me. I felt smaller, alone, a solitary figure in an unending expanse. I stumbled slightly over roots, boots pressing damp leaves. The trail remained gone. Darkness stretched behind me like a void, unbroken. The fog curled, subtle and insistent, pressing against my chest. I stopped again. The forest seemed to lean closer, patient, quiet, waiting. Shadows pooled at impossible angles. The trail, gone entirely, left nothing to guide me. I breathed slowly, carefully. The earth smelled damp and cold beneath me. Branches brushed against my face, soft and cold. Mist pressed around my ankles, curling, clinging. I moved forward once more, each step careful, deliberate. Shadows bent subtly, following, folding along the fog. The forest seemed infinite, endless in all directions. I glanced behind me once more. Darkness remained. No trail, no hint of passage. Only the soft press of mist and the low hum of the forest itself. I exhaled slowly. The path was gone. The forest stretched endlessly ahead, patient and indifferent. Leaves pressed damp beneath my boots. Fog curled around my legs, soft and cold. The shadows leaned ever so slightly, waiting. I walked on careful, soft, deliberate. Boots pressed moss and wet leaves. Mist curled higher, brushing my face, chilling and damp. Every step echoed faintly in the stillness, a reminder of my solitude. The trail behind me remained gone. Darkness alone pressed its quiet presence into the clearing. I did not look back again. I could feel it there, patient, endless, watching silently as I pressed forward. The forest was still. No wind moved the branches. Yet cold gripped me, sharp and insistent, pressing into my bones. My breath hung in the air, not rising, not falling, suspended fog-like, trembling softly in the dim light. Each exhale lingered, a ghostly echo of life. I stepped forward. Leaves pressed down beneath my boots, soft and cold. Mist curled around my ankles, clinging damp and heavy. Shadows leaned from twisted trunks, bending subtly with the fog. Shapes shimmered at the edge of my vision. Brief glimmers, almost human, almost alive. I blinked and they flickered away. Cold pressed harder against my skin. I stopped. Every small sound became exaggerated. A twig snapped beneath my foot, sharp and resonant. Rustling leaves whispered faintly, a static hum beneath the fog. The shapes returned, fleeting, impossible to focus on. They hovered just beyond perception, curling along the edges of my sight. Mist pressed higher, curling over boots and coat. Each inhale felt heavier, colder, tighter. I moved carefully. Branches brushed my arms softly, cold needles dragging against my skin. Leaves pressed damp and thick underfoot. The forest seemed alive with subtle movement, bending, watching, waiting. My breath hovered in front of me, a thin, frozen mist, curving and twisting softly in the dim light. It lingered, almost solid, a reflection of something unseen. I glanced around. Shadows pooled in corners between trunks. The shapes shimmered again, fleeting, deliberate. The fog wrapped close, brushing damp along my cheeks, pressing softly against my neck. I stepped forward again. The cold pressed deeper, fingering through coat and sleeves. Mist clung to every surface, thickening, curling. Every movement I made felt exaggerated in the stillness, the silence heavy with expectation. The shapes flickered closer. Not solid, not entirely empty. Just at the edge of sight, shivering faintly, impossible to pin down. I could feel their presence, patient, waiting. I exhaled slowly. My breath trembled in the air, frozen, lingering. Each small movement of fog around me seemed alive. Shadows bent subtly with intent. Leaves rustled softly beneath my boots. Branches scraped lightly against my coat and hair. Cold seeped through gloves and sleeves, biting, insistent. The forest seemed to shift with each subtle sound, amplifying them softly, eerily. I stopped again. Shapes shimmered faintly, curling at the edge of my vision. The fog moved with them, curling, pressing, dancing with intent. My breath hung still, frozen in front of me, trembling slightly. I moved cautiously. Boots pressed moss and damp leaves, soft but alive beneath my weight. Fog wrapped around my ankles, curling higher with each step. Shapes shimmered, folding and bending at impossible angles. Just out of focus. Cold pressed closer. Every inhale felt heavier, every exhale trembling in midair. The forest seemed aware of me, patient, deliberate. Every shadow and shimmer responded to the smallest motion. I paused. Mist pressed along my coat, clinging softly. The shapes flickered faintly, deliberate, patient. Breath hung like frozen smoke, soft and hypnotic. I stepped forward again. Branches brushed lightly against my face, needles cold and wet. Leaves pressed soft beneath my boots, damp and thick. The shapes shimmered briefly at the edge of sight, impossible to focus, yet undeniably present. The cold pressed deeper, slow, insistent, curling through the fog. Every sound was amplified softly. My boots, my breath, the faint rustle of leaves. Shapes shimmered again, folding, bending, patient. Breath hovered, frozen, ghostly, almost alive. I exhaled slowly, carefully. The forest remained still. Shadows pooled. The fog curled. The shapes shimmered just beyond focus. Cold pressed softly, lingering, hypnotic. I walked on, deliberate, cautious. Boots pressed damp moss and leaves. Mist curled around my legs, brushing my coat, chilling, persistent. Shadows leaned subtly. Shapes flickered. Breath hung frozen in the air. The forest held its patience, waiting, watching, and I moved softly, alone, wrapped in cold and fog, with shapes shimmering just beyond sight, breath frozen, suspended, impossible to ignore. The forest held its breath. Fog curled low, thick around roots and fallen branches. The damp air pressed cold against my face, carrying the scent of moss and wet earth. I stopped. A pair of eyes blinked in unison with me. High between branches, dark, unblinking, impossible. I looked away. When I glanced back, they had shifted closer, closer, just enough to unsettle every instinct of my body. Leaves rustled softly, but no wind moved. I stepped forward cautiously. Boots pressed damp moss, leaves curling beneath each step. Branches brushed my shoulders, cold and insistent. The eyes followed, patient, deliberate. The fog thickened, wrapping around me, damp and curling. I could feel the forest leaning in, waiting. Every small sound, my breath, the soft crunch of leaves, the drag of coat along branches, seemed amplified. I blinked again. The eyes blinked too, in quiet, mocking rhythm. Not human, not entirely alive, yet undeniably aware. Every time I looked away, they inched closer. I moved slowly, deliberately. Branches scraped along my arms, wet and cold. Fog curled around boots, wrapping higher with every step. Shadows pooled beneath trees, bending slightly as though they were alive. I stopped. The eyes waited, patient, deliberate, shifting just beyond focus. The forest seemed to hum softly, faint and insistent, vibrating to the cold air. Leaves pressed underfoot, damp and thick. Mist brushed along my sleeves and neck. Every step I took felt heavier, weighted by the presence of something unseen. I turned my head. The eyes blinked again, in perfect rhythm with mine. The small, synchronized movement made my chest tighten. Each exhale trembled in the cold, clinging air. I stepped forward cautiously. Boots pressed soft moss. Branches scraped softly against my coat. Fog curled around ankles, damp and persistent. I glanced back, though I knew I shouldn't. The eyes had shifted lower, closer, between branches now nearer to the forest floor. Not human, not solid, yet aware. Every small rustle of leaves seemed orchestrated, deliberate. My breath hung in the fog, visible, trembling. The forest leaned in, patient, waiting. Shadows shifted subtly, stretching along trunks. The eyes blinked again, following the smallest motion of my head. I moved again, slower this time. Fog curled higher, brushing cold against my face. Branches pressed lightly, damp and brittle. The eyes lingered, shifting closer, patient and deliberate. I stopped. Every small sound, breath, rustle, shift of leaves, felt alive, amplified. The forest hummed faintly, subtle, insistent. The eyes blinked again. Each time I blinked, they mirrored me perfectly. I swallowed. The damp air pressed heavy against my chest. Shadows leaned subtly, curling toward me. The eyes, just beyond focus, inched closer still. I moved forward slowly. Boots pressed soft, wet leaves. Branches brushed arms and coat. Fog curled along ankles, insistent. I glanced back. The eyes had shifted again, impossibly close. Just beyond the fog, patient, deliberate. I felt their awareness pressing, quiet, invasive. Every blink matched theirs. Every breath echoed faintly in the stillness. The forest seemed to bend, subtle, alive. Shadows folded along trunks and roots. I exhaled slowly, cautiously. The eyes waited, blinking with me, shifting with patience, deliberate, relentless. I stepped forward again. Boots pressed soft moss and leaves. Branches scraped damp and cold. Fog pressed higher along legs and coat. The forest held its patience. Shadows leaned subtly, folding in quiet rhythm. The eyes waited. Just beyond focus, patient, deliberate. I moved slowly, softly, breath visible, trembling in the fog curling around boots and legs, and the eyes blinked again. mirroring mine, closer than before. The clearing appeared suddenly. Fog curled along the ground, soft and damp. Leaves pressed wet and brittle beneath my boots. I stopped. A door stood there, weathered wood, splintered at the edges. No walls, nothing to hold it, and yet it stood upright, impossibly alone. I stepped closer. The air felt heavier, thick with damp and earth. Mist brushed my legs, clinging softly, curling with each step. The door hummed, faint, almost imperceptible. Not sound exactly. A vibration beneath the skin, a pull at the chest. I hesitated, breath shallow, visible in the cool fog. Leaves rustled softly behind me. Branches scraped lightly against my coat. The clearing felt smaller, enclosed, yet open. I was drawn toward the door, though every instinct whispered to stop. I reached out slowly. Fingertips brushed splintered wood. Cold, damp, alive in a way that shouldn't exist. The smell of wet pine and earth curled around me. I stepped closer still. Fog wrapped higher along my legs, damp and heavy. Shadows leaned subtly between the trees, folding toward the clearing. Every soft rustle seemed deliberate. The door waited, silent, patient, and yet it seemed to breathe, just barely, moving imperceptibly in the still air. I could feel it calling. Not a voice, not words. A force that tugged gently at the chest, insistent, subtle, impossible to resist. I stepped closer again. Branches scraped my shoulders. Leaves pressed soft and damp beneath boots. The fog thickened, curling, brushing along my coat and face, though it shifted slightly under my fingertips, not moving exactly, but responsive, like it was aware of me. The air hummed faintly, vibrating softly in rhythm with my heartbeat. I inhaled slowly. The fog pressed closer. Every small sound, the exhale, the scrape of leaves, my boots against moss, was exaggerated in the silence. The clearing held its breath with me. I stepped fully before it. The door was taller than I remembered seeing anywhere else. Its surface was rough, worn by time, yet strangely warm under my touch. A faint smell of rain and something older lingered, curling around me. I wanted to reach for the handle, hesitated, pulled back slightly, yet my feet moved forward on their own. The fog thickened even more. Branches bent softly, brushing my coat and hair. Shadows pulled along the edges of the clearing, still, patient. The door remained unmoving, waiting. I pressed closer. Fingers ran along splintered wood. The pull grew stronger, insistent, hypnotic. My breath hung visibly in the cold, curling, suspended, trembling. I stepped around it, circling, inspecting. No hinges, no walls, nothing to explain its presence. Yet I could feel its intent. Something was inside it, or behind it, or perhaps it was the door itself. The air hummed softly. Fog pressed higher around ankles, damp and curling. Leaves rustled faintly. Branches scraped soft and cold. I reached again. Fingertips traced the edges, cold and splintered. A faint vibration ran along my hand. Not sound exactly, but alive. Watching. Waiting. I exhaled slowly. The clearing held the breath with me. The fog curled, brushing along my coat and neck. Shadows leaned subtly, patient, deliberate. I stepped back slightly, heart slow and heavy. The door remained. Silent, weathered, impossible. The pull lingered, quiet, unrelenting. I stepped closer again. Feet damp from moss and leaves. Fog curling higher, brushing cold along ankles. Branches scraped softly, shadows folding in subtle rhythm. I reached one final time. Fingers brushed the wood. Cold, damp, alive. The door seemed to breathe in the stillness. I drew back. Fog pressed, damp and curling. Leaves whispered softly beneath boots. The clearing remained quiet, patient, still. The door waited. Alone, impossible. And I knew, somehow, it had always been there. The mist rolled in slowly. Thick, heavy, curling along the forest floor. It pressed damp and cold against my legs. The trees disappeared into white. Branches leaned ghost-like, obscured by the fog. Every sound softened, swallowed, and stretched into silence. I could feel it moving. Not wind, not air. The fog pulsed, almost alive, shifting around me like breath. It pressed lightly against my skin, damp and insistent. Leaves rustled faintly underfoot. A soft, hollow hum seemed to rise from the ground. I froze. The mist softened edges, blurred distance, made the familiar strange. Shapes moved within it, not fully formed, yet present. They swayed gently, rising and sinking like something breathing slowly. Eyes strained to define them, and failed. I stepped forward cautiously, feet wet from moss and mud. The fog wrapped higher, curling around ankles and knees. It smelled damp and cold, with a hint of something older, decayed, earthy. Each breath I took lingered. Suspended, visible, curling in the humid air. It felt unnatural, heavy, hypnotic, as if the fog watched my breathing, mirrored it, pulled it into itself. I moved again, footsteps quiet, careful. Mist pressed along the sides of the path, soft and curling, nudging me inward. The forest seemed to lean, closing the space around me. Shapes shifted closer. Never solid, never fixed. A shimmer here, a curve there. Each pulse of the fog carried them, rising and falling, breathing with the mist itself. I stopped. The air hummed faintly, vibrating under my skin. Leaves overhead scraped softly. A distant branch thudded lightly, absorbed immediately by the fog. I could hear my own heartbeat. Slow, heavy, echoing faintly against the muffled world. The fog seemed to thicken around it. Each exhale clung to the air, curling around me like a thread. I reached out, hand trembling. Fingers brushed the mist. Cold, damp, alive. It slipped around my hand, pulsing, shifting, withdrawing. I tried to look ahead. Shapes floated just beyond recognition. I blinked. They shifted closer. I turned slowly. The fog stretched, pulled at the edges of vision. Everything behind me dissolved into pale gray. I realized the path I had walked was gone, swallowed by mist. A soft hum rose. Not sound exactly. A vibration, felt in chest and bones. The fog pulsed with it. Every inhale synchronized with the rhythm, slow, hypnotic. I moved again, uncertain. Leaves damp, boots squelching slightly. The mist followed, curling higher, brushing wrists and neck. It seemed to guide me, gentle and insistent. Shapes continued to move, breathing with the fog. Not threatening, exactly, but deliberate, watching, patient. Edges blurred, shadows shifted, and I could not look away. I exhaled. The mist inhaled with me. Cold air pressed damp against the skin. Each breath felt heavy, drawn into the pulsing fog. I stepped more cautiously, feet sinking slightly in mud. Branches brushed my shoulders softly, leaves wet and cold. The fog swallowed the sound. The clearing I thought I saw vanished. Nothing remained but pulsing mist. It hovered, slow and deliberate, curling around me, alive in a way that made skin crawl. I stopped again. The fog pulsed in response, slow, hypnotic. Shapes hovered in and out, not solid, yet undeniably present. Every movement I made felt mirrored, absorbed. I drew back slightly, breath hanging visibly in the damp air. The mist shifted, brushing higher, curling at neck and hands. It breathed around me. Not wind, not air. It breathed. I exhaled slowly. Fog pressed close. Shapes shimmered faintly at the edges. Alone, yet not alone. The forest and mist moved with me. I stepped forward again. Boots wet, leaves soft beneath feet. The fog pulsed, hypnotic and alive. It seemed endless, swallowing all sound and distance. I knew I was within it now, part of its rhythm, its slow breathing, and I could not leave. The forest was quiet. Thick fog clung to the undergrowth. Leaves glistened with damp, and every step sank softly into moss. Then it came, a whisper, soft, almost tender. My name. I froze. The sound wrapped around me like silk, brushing ears and hair. Yet there was no one. Nothing moved. Branches shifted subtly. Shadows leaned in new angles. The trees seemed to stretch, as if to breathe, to rearrange. Every glance revealed a space familiar, yet subtly changed. The whisper came again. Closer. It threaded through the fog, brushing my cheek like a breath. Soft, patient, coaxing. It was not threatening. And yet, I stepped forward. Boots wet from moss, leaves curling underfoot. The fog pressed at my legs, cool and damp. It wrapped around me, carrying the faint hum of something alive. Another whisper. I turned. Nothing. Yet the forest had shifted. A tree that had leaned one way now leaned another. Paths that seemed open before were blocked by thick underbrush. I realized I was walking, but the path itself moved subtly under my feet. I tried to focus, breath hanging visibly in the cold air. Branches brushed my hands as I passed. The smell of wet earth, moss, and distant decay clung to the fog. The whisper followed. Soft, echoing, almost familiar. I could not locate it. Every turn I made, every glance, the sound remained, moving with me. Not from me. Shadows shifted. Mist curled around trunks, stretching long and thin. I felt eyes watching, though I could see none. The fog seemed alive, pulsing gently with the whispers. Each exhale, I drew hung in the air longer than natural. It trembled, stretched, then dissipated, as if listened to. I stopped. The whisper softened, almost fading. I held my breath. Footsteps hushed into silence. The mist thickened. Shapes swam just beyond vision, flickering in and out like pale memory. I walked again. Footfalls soft, careful, hesitant. The air smelled damp, metallic, and earthy all at once. Each step felt drawn forward, not by desire, but by subtle insistence. The forest rearranged silently, coaxing me deeper. A whisper brushed my ear. Closer now, not demanding, not threatening, inviting. My name lingered in the fog, twisting lightly, almost laughing in silence. I turned quickly. Branches whispered above, scraping softly against one another. Shadows folded and unfolded in impossible angles. I realized the clearing I had passed a moment before no longer existed. It was replaced by twisted trees, fog thickening at the roots. The whisper drew me onward. I felt in my chest, a pulse, a rhythm almost like breathing. The fog wrapped tighter around my shoulders and neck, damp, cool, insistent. Each inhalation echoed softly, almost in response. The forest and the fog seemed to share a heartbeat with the sound. I slowed. The whispers softened, curling around each thought. Shapes shimmered at the edges of my vision. Not solid, not fixed. I blinked, and they shifted closer, lingering, impossible to ignore. I stopped again. The forest held its breath. Silence pressed heavy, thick in my ears, except for the faint, coaxing hum. I realized the whispers were patient. They waited for me to move, for me to act. And I did. Step by step, I moved forward, boots sinking into soft, wet earth. Leaves pressed damp against my ankles. The whisper followed, twisting the fog, curling into my ears and thoughts. I turned slowly. Every glance revealed subtle change. The forest was alive, breathing, moving just beyond my senses. Every direction I looked, the mist rearranged, a hollow theater of light and shadow. The whisper softened to a sigh. I felt its warmth brush against my skin, though the air was cold. It lingered, patient, almost intimate. Yet I saw nothing, felt nothing solid. I exhaled. The fog trembled with it. Shadows quivered slightly, folding in and out of themselves. The forest remained alive, rearranging silently, waiting. The whisper was gone for now, but I knew it would return. Soft, patient, calling me, always. I stepped forward again. Footfalls quiet, breath slow. The forest pulsed softly around me, shifting, living, waiting. And I moved with it. The fog hung thick between the trees. Branches pressed low, dripping with dew. The air smelled of wet earth and old leaves. Shadows moved, not with the wind, not cast by any light. They twisted, shapes bent and merged. Dark forms stretched along the ground, then rose, folding into one another. Figures that resembled people, yet were not people I knew. Limbs curved impossibly, faces blurred. shifting with each blink. My pulse quickened, boots pressed soft against the moss, but every step felt like it echoed. The fog swallowed the sound. Yet I could feel the shadow shapes moving closer, bending toward me. I stopped. Breath hung in the cold air, visible and trembling. Leaves rustled faintly, though no wind stirred. The shadows twisted around one another, flowing like dark water. Shapes pressed closer, stretching just beyond my sight. I took a step back. Footfalls whispered against the damp earth. The shadows mirrored the movement, yet not perfectly. They twisted independently, bending toward me, folding into forms that were almost human, but wrong. I could smell dampness and something faintly metallic. It lingered in the air, brushing my nostrils with unease. The figures swayed slowly, deliberate and silent. I realized my heartbeat drummed in rhythm with their subtle movement. A shadow stretched taller. It elongated across the fog, merging into another form. Two shapes became one, then split again. Faces appeared and dissolved within the darkness. Eyes that were not eyes stared back, pale and hollow. I shivered. A soft hum, almost imperceptible, filled the space around me. It moved with the shadows, vibrating through the damp air. I could feel in my chest, slow and steady, hypnotic and wrong. I blinked. The shadows shifted again. Figures I hadn't seen before now lingered between the trees. Limbs moved with impossible angles. They were not solid, not fixed, yet they held weight in the mist. The forest held its breath. Even the fog seemed to hesitate, curling around tree trunks as if watching. Every time I shifted my gaze, the forms changed. Closer, then twisting away, then closer again. A leaf fell. It whispered as it landed, barely audible. The shadows reacted. A figure split from the mass, moving slowly toward me. Its limbs bent unnaturally, yet it moved with deliberate calm. I swallowed. Cold clung to my throat, damp against my skin. Breath trembled in the mist. The shape lingered, observing. It tilted its head, stretching impossibly, folding into itself, then standing tall again. The figures multiplied, not by creation, but by rearrangement. Shadows that had been simple now took form as something complex. I felt eyes upon me everywhere, though I could see none clearly. The forest seemed alive with their gaze. I tried to step aside. The mist shifted with me, curling and folding around the shapes. I realized the path I had walked moments ago no longer existed. Only the twisting shadows and fog remained, folding over one another in quiet patience. A figure reached out. Not a hand, not exactly, but a dark extension of itself that pressed toward me. The mist clung to it like skin. It hovered, unmoving, as though inviting me closer. I didn't move. I held my breath. The shadows swayed slowly, bending, folding, merging. Every time I glanced at one, it shifted again. The forms were alive in a way the fog and forest were not. I stepped back. Leaves crunched softly. Mist rolled over my boots, cold and damp. The figures followed, shifting with an eerie grace. I realized something. They were aware of me, not aware like an animal, but aware like thought itself. Every movement I made, every inhale, every blink, they folded into a new shape. I exhaled slowly. The mist seemed to thicken, curling around the forms. Shadows stretched long and thin. Faces appeared and disappeared in the darkness. I took a final step back, boots sinking into soft moss. The forest remained silent, yet alive. Shadows twisted and merged, then paused. Watching, waiting. I moved forward, careful, slow. The forms followed in quiet obedience, twisting, bending, shifting, and I walked among them, a pulse in the mist, unnoticed yet observed. The forest was quiet. Thick fog clung to the moss and roots. Damp earth pressed underfoot, soft and cold. A lantern swung gently. No hand held it. Its flicker painted the ground in trembling gold. Shadows danced across the moss, shifting with every sway. I stopped. The air smelled of wet wood and smoke, though no fire burned. A soft hum lingered, almost beneath the rustle of leaves. It made the hair on my arms rise. I stepped closer. The lantern swung faster. Light flickered over stones, over roots, over a ground that seemed to breathe. Shapes moved just beyond its reach, blurred and hesitant. I froze. Breath hung in the cold air, visible and trembling. Something shifted in the fog, just outside the lantern's glow. It moved quietly, deliberate. I could feel it watching. The forest pressed in. Branches leaned low, touching my shoulders, brushing my hair. Every step made a soft squelch in the mud. The lantern swayed again. Its glow flickered over something. Something too small, too low, and gone before I could see it clearly. I bent closer to the lantern. Its warmth barely touched my fingers. The swing slowed, but the shadows beyond the light, they moved with intent. Shapes pressed against the edge of vision. A twig snapped. Soft, distant. The lantern swung violently, though I touched nothing. Light stabbed into the darkness, revealing wet leaves that shivered under unseen feet. A faint breath, almost mine, whispered through the fog. I backed away. The fog thickened. Moss and mud clung to my boots. The lantern tilted, casting long, trembling shapes that bent like leaning trees. Something shifted just beyond the reach of light. I couldn't see it clearly, yet I knew it was there, watching, waiting. The forest smelled damp, metallic, and faintly of decay. Every inhale felt like breathing in shadow itself. The lantern's glow faltered, then steadied, but the movement outside its circle did not stop. I could sense limbs, or perhaps branches, moving in a way that was deliberate, alive. I took another step back. Boots sank softly into moss. Leaves whispered. A shape moved, smooth and silent, brushing against shadows, avoiding the light. It was aware of me. I was aware of it. The lantern swung higher. Its flicker caught on something. Something pale and still, then gone. The air held static, tension that pricked my skin and made my breath catch. I felt every heartbeat in my chest. I reached out. The lantern swung faster, almost dancing. Shadows stretched and shrank, bending across roots and stones. Something passed between the trees, quick and deliberate. I could not see it, only sense it. The forest seemed to shift subtly. Paths I had taken now looked different. Roots and stones rearranged beneath the flicker. The lantern's glow became a small island in a sea of mist and movement. Every time I blinked, shapes twisted closer to the edges of light. I knelt. The moss was wet against my fingers. The lantern swung low, light spilling over patterns in the dirt. Small footprints that were not mine. They led in and out of the glow, vanishing like smoke. A shiver ran down my spine. The hum returned, low and vibrating, wrapping around the forest like a living thing. I could feel it in my chest, in my bones. The shapes beyond the lantern remained, shifting, patient, unseen. I stepped forward, hesitant. The lantern swayed to meet me. Its flame caught on something bright, then shadow swallowed again. Movement, deliberate, weaving around the light, just beyond its reach. I could not turn away. My feet moved slowly forward, guided by the flickering glow. Shapes pressed against the fog, bending with intent. The forest held its breath. I inhaled sharply. The lantern swung gently again. The shadows, the fog, the unseen watcher, they paused with me. A quiet tension hung in the air, thick as smoke. The forest waited. I stayed there. Alone, the lantern swayed. Shadows lingered just beyond its light, and the fog curled around everything. The fire glowed pale in the clearing. Its warmth barely touched the chill that clung to my skin. Smoke curled into the dark canopy, thin and silvery, whispering upward. I sat on a damp log. Ashes drifted, soft and weightless. The air smelled of wood, damp earth, and the faint tang of moss. Then I heard it. Soft footsteps. Circling. Slow. Careful. They moved in rhythm with nothing I could see. The fire never dimmed. It burned steadily. Yet the steps shifted closer. A rustle behind a tree made my shoulders tense. I dared not look. Each footfall pressed into the moss, silent yet deliberate. The shadows swayed, flickering over stones, roots, and leaves. A twig broke quietly beneath something unseen. I felt it near, though sight betrayed me. The heat of the flames met cold air on my cheeks. Breath hung in front of me, pale and still. Every snap of a branch seemed amplified, echoing. Every crackle in the fire became a drum. Counting time I couldn't escape. I could smell wet pine, thick and sharp. The hum of insect had vanished, leaving only the fire's whisper and those footsteps. They circled left, right, then stopped. A pause that pressed against my chest, slow and intimate. The firelight caught on something low, near the roots, a shadow that trembled, almost human, almost breathing. I blinked. It shifted. I was alone, but not alone. Footsteps began again, closer this time. The moss pressed differently beneath them, or perhaps beneath me. Each step measured, echoing against invisible walls. A scent, faint but wrong, brushed my nose. Earthy, damp, metallic. The kind you don't expect in the quiet of the woods. The fire cast hands of light across the clearing. Each flicker carved figures in the dark. Shapes that bent unnaturally. Shadows that moved, independent of flame. I held my breath, hoping to vanish into the silence, yet drawn forward by something I could not name. The footsteps rotated once more, brushing just beyond the firelight. Every rotation made the warmth of the flames seem colder. I wanted to look behind me, to see who or what was there. But the moment I thought it, a breeze rose, carrying the smell of moss and wet stone. The firelight shimmered, and nothing remained visible. The footsteps paused again, long enough for me to sense a presence, deliberate, patient, just at the edge of reason. I could feel eyes, watching, shifting, measuring. Yet every glance I risked revealed only dancing shadows. The smoke curled around me, smelling of old wood and wet leaves. The fire hissed softly, sparks lifting into fog. Every nerve in my body hummed. I could feel the rhythm of those unseen steps in my chest, in my bones. I whispered my own name. No reply, just the steps resuming, circling closer still. They were patient, teasing. I did not move. I could not move. The light trembled over a patch of moss. Something brushed past, careful, deliberate. It left no mark, no imprint on soil or stone. I could smell the damp forest air deep in my lungs, heavy and clinging. The warmth of the fire could not reach the chill at my heart. The steps rotated once more, then receded, soft and slow. Yet I knew they lingered. The fire continued, flickering and breathing. The clearing held its quiet. The fog hugged the roots and rocks. And the footsteps waited, patient, unseen. I sat, still, hoping for morning, hoping for movement to stop. But I could feel it. Footsteps behind the fire, always circling. And I knew when I rose, the forest would not release me. The forest was quiet. Thick fog hugged the trunks, softening every edge. Branches swayed gently, yet no wind moved. I stepped forward, the moss muffling my footsteps. Cold seeped into my bones. The air smelled damp, earthy, heavy with the scent of decay. Then I saw it, at the edge of the clearing. A figure, still unmoving. I blinked. It did not shift. Not a breath, not a twitch. Yet I could feel its gaze on me, sharp, unwavering. The fire I had left behind flickered faintly, casting pale light across the fog. Shadows danced, yet the figure remained rooted. Its shape was human, but wrong, disproportionate, unfamiliar. A rustle behind a tree made my heart tighten. I dared not turn. The figure's eyes, or the suggestion of them, followed me wherever I moved. My skin prickled. The damp air clung to it, icy and oppressive. Each step toward it was hesitant, measured. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Leaves hung motionless in the fog. Even the hum of distant insects had vanished. The ground beneath me felt strange, soft, almost alive. Roots curled under the moss like sleeping fingers. I thought I felt movement beneath my feet, but when I looked, only shadows lay there. The figure did not change. No step forward, no blink, no whisper. Yet the sensation of being watched pressed against my chest. A static, buzzing tension. The fog thickened, curling around my ankles. It smelled of wet stone and rotting leaves. I lifted a hand, trembling, brushing against the mist. It passed through me like silk, cold and fleeting. I took another step. The figure remained. Closer, though I could not measure distance. Closer, though I had not moved. The air felt heavy in my lungs. Breath hung suspended, visible and trembling. Every exhale seemed to vanish into the mist before it fell. The world grew silent. Even the trees seemed to lean toward me. I tried to focus on details. A face? None I could see. Hands? Hidden in folds, or perhaps absent. It was a void that had shape, a presence that had weight. And yet it was waiting. A twig snapped far behind me. My pulse jumped. The figure remained, unmoved, patient. I felt my own heartbeat thumping in rhythm with attention, loud and insistent. The mist thickened further, curling like smoke around the figure. It seemed to pulse, breathing with the forest itself. A soft hum rose from nowhere, vibrating the air in my ears. I tried to speak. No sound left my lips. I stepped backward. The ground seemed to shift beneath my feet, unsteady. The fog parted slightly, revealing the figure more clearly, yet still its features were obscured, a silhouette of darkness. I could smell the wet earth, the cold fog, and something else, something metallic like iron, faint but sharp. It reached for me, though it did not move. Its gaze, imagined or real, traced my every motion. I froze. The forest held its breath. Time stretched. I could feel the weight of the stillness pressing down. And then I realized I could not look away. Turn would feel like surrender, yet staring felt impossible. The figure anchored me in place, tethered to the fog, to the silence, to the chill that seeped into my bones. I took another step. The fog shifted, curling around me, around the figure. I felt a presence behind me, then beside me, yet I dared not turn. I could hear nothing but my own breath, visible and fragile. The figure remained, patient, watching, immovable. I crouched slightly, trying to make myself smaller. The fog swirled, hiding my movements, yet I felt the gaze follow, unwavering, inescapable. Every instinct screamed to run, yet my legs refused. I whispered my own name. The forest swallowed it. The figure did not respond. It did not need to. The mist began to thin, revealing the trees once more. But the figure stayed, a sentinel at the edge of perception, a presence that waited. I backed slowly, careful not to break the spell. Each step felt heavier, each breath more difficult. And still it remained, at the edge of the clearing, at the boundary of reason and fear, unmoving, unblinking, watching. And I understood in the silence, in the fog, in the still way of the forest, I was not alone. Not even for a moment. The forest had changed. Mist rolled between the trunks, thick and heavy, pressing against my skin. Even familiar shapes disappeared, swallowed by gray. I stepped forward. Moss muffled my feet. Each footfall sounded impossibly loud. A hollow echo, bouncing back from nowhere. Branches brushed my arms. Cold, wet, sticky with dew. The smell of damp earth was sharper here, almost pungent. A metallic tang lingered in the fog, subtle, unsettling. The world was silent, not the quiet of night, but the quiet of absence. No birds, no rustle, no hum. Only my breath, visible and trembling, hanging in the frozen air. I called a name, soft, tentative. No answer came, only the echo of my own voice, stretched and warped, disappearing into the fog. The fog thickened around me. Shapes hinted at themselves in the gray, then vanished. I thought I saw movement, yet it was only the mist curling like smoke. A shadow brushed past my vision. I froze. Nothing remained. I walked slowly, measuring each step. The earth squelched beneath my boots, the smell of wet moss clinging to my skin. Cold seeped deeper, curling into my chest, chilling my lungs with each breath. A rustle far ahead made my pulse quicken. I turned, eyes straining through the pale light. The forest seemed endless, repeating itself, rearranging subtly with every blink. No path, no landmarks, only fog. My footsteps echoed again. I stopped. They continued. Alone, I realized. No one else was here. A tree leaned close, its trunk slick with moisture. I touched it, feeling the rough bark under my fingertips. The fog pressing from all sides, soft, almost tactile, wrapping around me like a damp sheet. I breathed, slow and shallow, listening. The mist seemed to swallow sound itself. Even the echo of my heartbeat felt distant. I moved again. The forest shifted with me. Trunks and branches appeared where none had been. The fog stretched, thickened, then thinned, always rearranging, always waiting. A pale light appeared in the distance, flickering, hesitant, as if unsure it should exist. I reached toward it, but the mist resisted, tugging at my clothes, at my limbs, holding me in place. The air vibrated faintly, a hum, low and distant, like the echo of a memory. I leaned forward, straining to hear. It disappeared. I stopped. The silence pressed close, heavy and complete. My eyes darted through the fog, but nothing moved, nothing breathed, nothing watched. Yet the feeling remained. The fog itself seemed alive, pulsing with a quiet, patient rhythm. I could feel it breathe with me, exhale around me, fold over me. I realized I was part of it now. A twig snapped beneath my foot. I flinched. The echo stretched impossibly far, bouncing between invisible trees. No one came. No one had been there. I took another step, slow, deliberate. The fog wrapped tighter, curling around my ankles, climbing toward my knees. It smelled of wet stone and decayed leaves, heavy and sharp. I could taste the dampness on my tongue. I paused. A shiver passed through me. I felt small, insignificant, suspended in the gray. Yet, strangely, there was no terror, only acceptance. The echoes of my steps continued, soft, hollow, solitary. They were mine alone. I lifted my head. The fog stretched endlessly above, beyond the reach of my sight. The forest around me was gone, replaced by a rolling, breathing gray. No shadows, no figures, no light. I exhaled. Steam curled in front of my face, cold and dense, but comforting in its own strange way. I realized I had been holding my breath. I began to walk again, slow, steady, a rhythm in step with the fog. No path, no direction, no markers. Just me and the thick, living mist. And I understood, alone but not afraid. The forest had swallowed everything else. The fog had become my world, and I had become part of it. A step, then another, footsteps echoing softly in the gray. I was utterly alone, yet somehow perfectly, undeniably at peace. The mist shifted. It breathed around me, and I walked with it endlessly,